Right. Fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela. And there's definitely...
Cozying up to China and Iran, which are part of that, certainly does.
But again, cozying up to China and Iran, talking about what matters on the world stage, is different from what most people who voted for Donald Trump heard him say, which is, I'm going to focus on Americans, I'm going to focus on groceries, I'm going to put American dollars.
And President Trump has done that.
In today's video, CNN host Dana Bash presses Jim Jordan on CNN's State of the Union because the second he starts defending Trump's sudden Venezuela power play, talking about oil, America first, and even the idea of boots on the ground, Jordan tries to frame it like it's all about protecting Americans and stopping narco-terrorists. But the questions keep getting sharper. How is this not another foreign intervention? How does this fit Trump's no more wars promise? And why does it suddenly sound like the US is running another country? So let's dive in and watch how Dana Bash destroys Jim Jordan on CNN's State of the Union.
Here with me now is Republican Congressman and Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Jim Jordan. Thank you so much for being here. One of the things that I know that the president's supporters absolutely love is that he has been arguing since he first ran 10 years ago that he's going to end forever wars and put America first.
Yeah.
Now he says he's running Venezuela. He's totally open to putting boots back on the ground there. And he's signaling that Cuba and Colombia could be next. How is that America first?
I mean, look, I trust the president to make decisions that are in the best interest of Americans, of our country. This president gets results. I think when you have a guy who's not recognized as a head of state, who's head of a narco-terrorist criminal operation, who's cozying up to Iran and China, and he's doing it right here in our hemisphere, bringing that individual to justice, I think that's a good thing. Most Americans think that's a good thing. And that's consistent with keeping drugs off the streets. I know folks in the 4th District of Ohio and what fentanyl and other drugs have done to some families that I get the privilege of representing.
But fentanyl
helping deal with that, I think is a good thing. And Americans recognize this for decisive action that makes a difference for us and, frankly, for Venezuelans.
Right. Fentanyl doesn't come from Venezuela. And there's definitely...
Cozying up to China and Iran, which are part of that, certainly does.
But again, cozying up to China and Iran, talking about what matters on the world stage, is different from what most people who voted for Donald Trump heard him say, which is, I'm going to focus on Americans, I'm going to focus on groceries, I'm going to put American dollars.
And President Trump has done that. President Trump said he'd cut taxes, he did. President Trump said he'd secure the border, he did. President Trump said he'd get men out of women's sports, he did. President Trump has said he'd lower gas prices, he did. President Trump said he'd make sure Iran did get nuclear capability, he did. He did all those things in 1 year's time. That is certainly making America great again. That is certainly consistent with what he said. And getting a bad guy brought to justice who's had a 5-year arrest warrant, that is certainly consistent with that theme and that message as well. So I think the American people appreciate that. And frankly, I think that's the message we go tell the American people in this midterm election. President Trump and Republicans did what we said we would do.
How are they going to feel about the fact that the president said that America is committed to rebuilding Venezuela, particularly the oil fields, spending money to do that?
Well, again, I think Americans recognize when that country took assets that belonged to American companies, that's wrong. That's all President Trump is saying is going to change in the future relative to oil. I think that makes sense. They took property from American companies. That makes sense that there's going to be some kind of compensation, some kind of reckoning for that. I think that's consistent with putting American interests first, which is what the president has talked about since he first, came down the escalator 10 years ago.
But he's also not ruling out putting boots back on the ground in Venezuela. He said that we, the United States, the people behind him at the time yesterday were the people in charge of the State Department, the Defense Department, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs are now in charge of Venezuela. That is definitely not what people thought he meant when he said America first.
Again,
the whole America first, no more forever wars brand only works as long as the audience believes it means. Focus on the kitchen table stuff at home and stop acting like the world's police. And the second you start hearing talk about running Venezuela, rebuilding oil fields, and not ruling out boots on the ground, that's not a minor policy tweak. That's literally the playbook Trump campaigned against. And Dana's point hits even harder when you look at the facts. First, the fentanyl argument doesn't even line up. The fentanyl fueling US overdose deaths overwhelmingly comes through trafficking networks tied to Mexico, with precursor chemicals largely sourced from China. Venezuela is not the center of that pipeline, so using fentanyl as the emotional justification for a major foreign operation feels like grabbing a scary headline to sell something else. Second, that they stole our oil framing is a big tell. Even if American companies were wronged, the normal path is arbitration, courts, sanctions, not turning the US military into a collection agency for corporate assets. That's the kind of logic that makes other countries assume we're intervening for resources, not values. And historically, when America's motives look like oil plus regime change, the blowback lasts decades. Third, the process matters. Congress is the branch that declares war and authorizes long-term military action. Commander-in-chief doesn't mean the president gets to unilaterally decide the country is being invaded and then treat that as a blank check. That's exactly why courts exist, to stop one person from stretching wartime powers into whatever they want. And here's the political reality. Voters can tolerate a tough foreign policy when it clearly improves their lives. But when groceries are still expensive, housing is still brutal, and people feel squeezed, it's going to be a hard sell explaining why the US is suddenly taking responsibility for Venezuela's future.
We'll see. We don't know what that exactly means. What we do know is President Trump's track record of getting results is, I think, stellar. I mean, why do you think Hamas released the hostages back to Israel? Because President Trump took out Iran's nuclear capabilities. Why do you think that we got the Abraham Accords in his first term?
Yeah.
Because he kept his word and put the embassy in Jerusalem. Why do you think European countries
no question
are
that
now
the
giving more to
Maduro-
NATO? Because President Trump made it happen.
There's no question that the Maduro mission was successful. But the question is, what's next? And what is the American
And what I'm saying is we'll see, but I
tax
trust
dollar,
this administration.
taxpayer on the hook
I
for?
trust Secretary Rubio. I trust Secretary Hicks. I trust President Trump in his making decisions that, again, are in the best interest of the American people. And frankly, I trust our military. I mean, this operation, the courage, the precision of this operation, truly amazing. God bless them, and God bless the commander-in-chief who takes decisive
The military is
action.
extraordinary. Military does missions like this in a way that is just mind-boggling. Again, it's not about the military. It's about the government in Venezuela ahead of time. I do want to ask more about kind of what the president's mindset is with regard to policy right now. He explicitly redefined America First in his press conference yesterday. For a long time, again, people thought it meant spending American taxpayer dollars, not on foreign wars, not in foreign countries, but at home. Now he says he's enacting a new strategy where, quote, American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be questioned again. That's a shift in his approach.
That's consistent with the Constitution. That's consistent with the War Powers Act. And most importantly, I think it's consistent with history. You can go James Monroe, Teddy Roosevelt, JFK,
But he
President
never said
Trump
he was
in our
James
hemisphere.
Monroe.
Well, no, I know, but operating in our hemisphere, that is consistent historically, constitutionally with...
But it's
with
not
his,
consistent with what he has said as a candidate.
I think Americans appreciate a commander-in-chief who demonstrates strength, shows strength, and takes decisive action. Think about, contrast the president's actions, what took place 2 days ago, what took place with Midnight Hammer when he stopped Iran. Contrast that with the previous administration. Contrast that with Joe Biden led a Chinese spy balloon fly clear across the country and then shot it down. Do you think President Trump would allow that? I think the American people appreciate the fact that he demonstrates strength and he takes decisive action for the benefit of Americans.
What gets me about this Dana Bash versus Jim Jordan clash is how fast America First turns into America Everywhere the second there's a flashy foreign win to brag about. Because here's the reality, the US Constitution doesn't give any president a blank check to run another country just because he feels like it's in our interest. Congress is the branch that's supposed to authorize wars, and the war powers framework exists specifically because we learned painfully what happens when presidents freestyle foreign policy and drag the country into open-ended messes. And the Venezuela talk has big Iraq-Afghanistan energy for a reason. We'll stabilize it, we'll rebuild, we'll get the oil flowing, then we'll have elections. That's literally the script we've heard before, and it usually ends with US taxpayers footing the bill while the region stays unstable anyway. Even legal scholars have been warning that Trump's recent strikes, like Operation Midnight Hammer on Iranian nuclear facilities, revive serious constitutional questions about executive war powers. Also, the "it's about fentanyl" justification doesn't cleanly fit Venezuela. Most fentanyl entering the US is tied to synthetic opioid supply chains and precursor chemicals, often routed through Mexico and China, not Venezuelan coke routes. So when the messaging keeps drifting toward oil fields and compensation, Dana's point hits harder. Voters didn't sign up for a Western Hemisphere nation-building project. Strength is one thing, but strength without limits, oversight, or a clear endgame is how you end up with another forever war, just with a different flag on the map.
We talk about drugs, and here is something that President Trump did. After the former president of Honduras went through the American judicial process, was found guilty, was sentenced for a whole bunch of really bad things with regard to sending drugs into the U.S., poisoning American children, as you would say. The president pardoned him. How is that consistent with going in?
The president's clear
with
about this, I think, in his press conference. The pardon power, by the way, is exclusive to the president. They can exercise it however they darn well want.
Should he?
And
Should he have done
he
it?
exercised that way, and he said he thought that the Biden administration treated this individual, the former president, in an unfair fashion, and so he chose to pardon him. President Biden issued pardons for
But this is about consistency on
preemptive
drugs.
pardons for people in the January 6th committee. He issued pardon for his family. So this is a power that our Constitution gives exclusively to the president. They can exercise it how they choose.
Let me ask you really quickly, because Maduro is in New York, and he is expected to, maybe as soon as tomorrow, as Monday, to have a hearing. Are you comfortable with Nicolas Maduro being tried through the American judicial system? Should he have the same rights as American citizens?
Yeah, I think that's why he's being tried in our system.
You're
Our system's
good with that?
the best in history, the best on the planet. Of course, that's the best system. And that's where the indictment, the 5-year arrest warrant, came from the Southern District of New York. Jay Clayton signed I read the indictment yesterday, 25 pages. This guy's engaged in all kinds of bad behavior, had a 5-year arrest warrant, was not recognized as the head of the state, ran a narco-terrorist criminal operation, and was cozying up to Iran and China, and he was doing it in our hemisphere, which is just wrong. And so the idea that he's now being brought to justice, I think, is a darn good thing. And I think most Americans see it that way. And they appreciate the decisive action from their commander-in-chief, our president, President Trump, as particularly contrasted with what we saw from Joe Biden, who let a Chinese spy balloon fly clear across the country before he even shot it down. I think you would have shot it down before it went across the country, and I know President Trump would have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Now, if your whole political brand is no more forever wars, then you don't get to casually talk about running Venezuela, hint at boots on the ground, and start sounding like we're about to do another open-ended nation-building experiment in the Western Hemisphere. That's not strength. That's mission creep. And history shows that once you start guiding another country's leadership, you don't get to control how expensive or chaotic it becomes. Iraq started with quick and easy too, and the drug argument Jordan leans on falls apart under basic scrutiny. The fentanyl crisis, which is what's killing people, overwhelmingly traces back to synthetic opioid supply chains tied to Mexico and precursor chemicals largely sourced from China, not Venezuela. So using Venezuela as the centerpiece of a drug war justification just doesn't match the reality of what Americans are actually facing. Then there's the pardon point, which Dana is smart to hammer. Trump pardoned former Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez in December 2025, a man convicted of trafficking over 400 tons of cocaine into the US and sentenced to 45 years. That completely undercuts the "we're doing this for justice" framing. You can't claim you're cracking down on narco traffickers while freeing one of the biggest ones ever prosecuted in US court. Dana's point is simple. If America first means prioritizing Americans, then explain why U.S. attention, money, and military posture are drifting toward Venezuela instead of fixing housing, healthcare, and costs at home. That contradiction isn't a media narrative, it's the entire story. Pause. Are you getting tired of getting half the story from biased news sources? One outlet says one thing and another says the complete opposite. How are you supposed to know what's actually true? That's where ground news comes in. It lets you compare how different media outlets, left, right, and center are covering the same story. So you can see the full picture instead of just the echo chamber. And here's the best part. Click the link in the description and get 40% off the Vantage tier, which gives you even deeper insights into media bias and political trends. Stay informed, think for yourself, and check out Ground News in the description down below.